In motorsport history, we all know the legends. Ferrari's screaming V12, Mercedes Silver Arrows, Cosworth DFVs. But hidden behind the spotlight are engines that quietly reshaped racing, forced rulebooks to be rewritten, and gave us some of the most outrageous performances the world has ever seen. These weren't engines designed for balance or efficiency. They were experiments, gambles, and sometimes acts of pure madness. Moments when engineers asked, not should we, but only can we. This is the story of the engines that changed racing forever, but nobody talks about anymore. The Ford 427 SOHC Cammer was perhaps the most dangerous what-if in NASCAR history. Designed in 1964 in direct response to Chrysler's 426 HEMI, the Cammer was Ford's ultimate power play in the horsepower wars. At its heart was a 7.0-liter V8, but unlike most pushrod engines of its time, the Cammer featured a single overhead camshaft per bank. That meant larger valves, better breathing, and higher revs. A massive 6-foot-long timing chain connected the crankshaft to the cams, a setup so unusual it became one of the Cammer's trademarks. It made 657 horsepower at 7,500 RPM straight out of the box, with drag racing versions easily exceeding 700 horsepower at 8,000 RPM. For context, the Chrysler HEMI of the same era was making around 550 to 575 horsepower. Ford had built an engine that simply outclassed everything, but NASCAR's leadership saw danger on the horizon. If the Cammer were allowed, it would dominate every oval in America, and the balance of competition would vanish overnight. Citing lack of production numbers, NASCAR banned the engine in 1966 before it even had the chance to properly race. Banned from the track, the Cammer found a new home on the drag strip. There, it terrorized quarter miles across America, powering funny cars and dragsters deep into the 1970s. It became legendary among hot rodders, a forbidden fruit of NASCAR history. The Cammer was more than an engine. It was proof that sometimes innovation is so far ahead of its time that the only answer is to outlaw it. If the Ford Cammer was brute force, the Mazda R26B was pure madness. Instead of pistons, Mazda engineers turned to Felix Wankel's rotary design, where rotors spin inside an oval-shaped chamber. The concept was compact, lightweight, and free of the moving parts that limited piston engines. The R26B was the ultimate expression of this philosophy. A 4-rotor rotary engine, naturally aspirated, displacing just 2.6 liters, but producing 700 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. It weighed significantly less than its piston rivals and could sustain screaming high revs for hours without destroying itself. In 1991, Mazda dropped the R26B into the 787B prototype, painted in its now iconic orange and green renowned livery. What happened next shocked the motorsport world. Against giants like Jaguar, Porsche, and Mercedes, Mazda's rotary-powered machine won the 24 Hours of Le Mans outright. Not just won, it dominated, becoming the first Japanese manufacturer ever to win the race and the only rotary-powered car to do so. Fans still remember the sound. Unlike piston engines, the R26B produced a banshee-like shriek, a piercing wail that echoed down the Mulsanne Strait. Mechanics described it as both haunting and beautiful, a sound that no other car could replicate. But success was short-lived. After 1991, the FIA rewrote the rulebook, effectively banning rotary engines from endurance racing. Officially, it was to standardize engines and control costs. Unofficially, many suspected it was because the R26B had exposed just how far rotary technology could go if left unchecked. The Mazda R26B was a one-hit wonder, but it left behind a legend. It proved that sometimes the strangest engine in the room can also be the one that makes history. In the world of American racing, one name dominated for nearly half a century: the Offenhauser, or simply the Offie. Born from a Harry Miller design in the 1930s, the Offie was an inline 4 that started small, just 1.5 liters, but over time grew into a giant killer. By the 1950s, it was the engine of choice at the Indianapolis 500, displacing 4.2 liters naturally aspirated or 2.8 liters turbocharged. At its peak, the Offie delivered over 1,000 horsepower at 9,000 RPM in qualifying trim, a staggering figure for an engine with just 4 cylinders. What made the Offie special wasn't just its power, but its durability. Built with a monoblock design, where the cylinder head and block were a single piece, it could handle immense boost pressures without warping or blowing head gaskets. Mechanics loved it because it was simple to maintain, yet bulletproof under stress. The results speak for themselves. The Offie won the Indianapolis 500 a record 27 times between 1935 and 1976. For decades, if you wanted to win at the Brickyard, you ran an Offie. It was as simple as that. Eventually, the engine was outclassed. By the late 1970s, turbocharged V8s from Cosworth and others replaced it, and the Offie faded into history. But for nearly 50 years, this humble four-cylinder was the beating heart of American open-wheel racing. It didn't just change Indy, it defined it. France has never been the first country people think of when it comes to Formula One engines. But in the late 1960s, Matra built something that made the world listen, the MS-11 V12. The engine was a 3.0-liter naturally aspirated V12, producing around 450 horsepower at 10,500 RPM. On paper, it wasn't as powerful as Ferrari's V12S or as successful as Cosworth's DFV V8, but what it lacked in dominance, it made up for in character. The sound was unforgettable. High-pitched, metallic, and raw. It was unlike anything else on the grid. Jackie Stewart, who drove Mattress during his career, described it as like a violin played with a chainsaw. Fans who heard it trackside say the scream of the Matra V12 still echoes in their memories. Beyond sound, the Matra proved France could build serious racing machinery. It took Jackie Stewart to multiple victories, helped Matra win the 1969 Constructors' Championship, and later evolved into the V12S that conquered Le Mans in the 1970s. The MS-11 wasn't the most successful engine of its era, but it left behind a legacy of passion and national pride. It was proof that sometimes an engine doesn't have to win everything to be remembered. It just has to make people feel something every time it fires. Few engines in racing history are as iconic or as feared as the Porsche 917's Flat 12. Originally a 4.5-liter engine producing 580 horsepower at 8,400 RPM, it was expanded to 4.9 liters for endurance racing. Then when Porsche entered the Can-Am series, they strapped on twin turbochargers, pushing output past 1,100 horsepower at over 8,000 RPM. For the early 1970s, that number was science fiction. The car it powered, the Porsche 917, was a beast. Early versions were terrifying, unstable at high speeds, twitchy in corners, and described by drivers as trying to kill you. But once Porsche refined the aerodynamics, the 917 became unstoppable. It won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1970 and 1971, giving Porsche its first overall victories at the event. The Flat 12 didn't just power wins, it redefined endurance racing. It proved that you could combine insane power with 24-hour durability, something many thought impossible. And when the turbocharged versions hit Can-Am, the 917/30 was so dominant that it essentially killed the series. Rivals couldn't compete with an engine that powerful. Today, people talk about the Porsche 911 as the brand's icon, but it was the 917 Flat 12 that cemented Porsche as a legend in motorsport. It was brutal, excessive, and unforgettable. These engines weren't just mechanical creations, they were turning points in history. The Ford Camry proved that innovation could be too good to be allowed. The Mazda Rotary showed that the strangest ideas sometimes work best. The Offenhauser became the backbone of American racing. The Matra gave France a voice on the world stage. And the Porsche Flat 12 redefined what was possible in endurance racing. They may not be talked about as much today, but they shaped the sport in ways we still feel every time the lights go out and the engines roar. This was the story of the engines that changed racing forever, but nobody talks about anymore.